very happy that Tom Mitchell today is open for my questions to this topic. I mean, the history of car production in the United States is huge and long. And Tom, we wanted to start the discussion with the first question. Since when are you in this industry, and what is your company doing in all these plants in North Africa? North America, sorry.
North America, yeah. We're not North Africa right now.
Not yet.
But yeah, I'll share a little bit of background on Insequence if I could, just jump into a few slides. But while I'm pulling that up, what a great audience. We have really representatives from Nashville, New York, Mexico, UK, Germany, Czech Republic, and who knows where else on this call. Really emphasizes that the automotive manufacturing is a global industry, regardless of where you're located. So, it's impressive to see that. And again, what a great group. So an honor to be here and leading this presentation. So a little bit about Insequence. I'll just jump into it here and won't spend a lot of time and marketing Insequence, but to give you a sense of who we are. So we're not new to the game. We've been around almost 30 years. In fact, next year will be our 30th year in the automotive industry. Got our start in sequencing, implemented hundreds of systems globally. And those systems are from simple sequencing. I say simple, that's kind of downplaying it a little bit, but sequencing systems to complex manufacturing execution systems that have logistics back ends to it, to shop floor manufacturing automation. While we work with any number of OEMs, our customers are tier one automotive suppliers and logistics companies. But we have to have good relationships with OEMs, obviously, those connections to be able to take those orders and broadcast from the OEMs to manufacture parts. And Hans, earlier you kind of alluded to how many cars we've touched and over the years. And conservatively, it's been a couple of 100 million cars. Our technology has touched, whether again it's the logistics side, the manufacturing side of final components. But when you factor all that together, we've, again, a conservative number, we've touched well over 1 billion components that goes into manufacturing an automobile, again, globally. So we've been there, done that. Again, we're not new to the game. We're not a startup. We've seen a lot of changes over the years, and we continue to grow, which is exciting for us. So our headquarters is in Nashville, Tennessee. Denise, great to hear that accent. So we ought to connect sometime soon. But we have customers spread, globally. In the Americas, we're really U.S., Canada, Mexico, South America, which includes Argentina and Brazil. Then in Europe, our headquarters is based in the UK. We have customers spread across the continent in France, Germany, Hungary, Belgium, Poland, and with many other opportunities that we're working right now across the continent. I mentioned OEMs. Again, OEMs are not our customer, but we have to have a good relationship with OEM. And this is just a quick snapshot of the OEMs that we have to have connections to for our customers. Again, it's not a comprehensive, complete list. You can go to our website and see what all we do with the OEMs, and how we interact with OEMs on behalf of our customers, so they can interact with them to provide the final components, getting the right parts, the right order at the right time to them, so not to delay assembly line. And just a quick snapshot of our solutions. So we really have you could integrate all of these solutions, or you can break them apart separately. But we got our start with sequencing, sequential parts delivery back in the mid to late 90s. And from there, we grew to include manufacturing, shop floor solutions. And now we work really in any environment, whether it's just in time, just in sequence, bulk or batch build or build to order. So we're flexible, agile, and again, we've worked in just about every imaginable kind of environment. Something we're proud of, and again, our flexibility is kind of key. So anyway, that's a little bit about Insequence, Hans, and I'll turn it back
Yeah.
over to you to kind of facilitate the questions, unless anybody has any questions right
Yes.
now.
Thank you for answering my question about the number of cars, and you said it is a conservative calculation which you did. So it's a huge experience you're having, and that this will also help us to understand the changes in the industry which you were witnessing. Another historic question: is there any manufacturing plant in the US you haven't visited yet?
Not that I'm aware of. I know when you asked me that previously, I couldn't think of one. But I will tell you, there's several plants that are actually in development right now, under construction, and we have active conversations with customers, at those plants. So I suspect we'll be in just about every plant. I mean, probably the newest plant that we've gone into recently is the Hyundai EV plant in Georgia, in Savannah, Georgia. So that is a totally new plant for Hyundai. And we actually have a customer there manufacturing parts for Hyundai. But we've been, riding this wave of changes in the EV market, and we've seen some plants convert to EV. We've seen some plants convert to EV, kind of go back to ICE. So there's kind of this wave of change that we have to be prepared for and work with our customers to solve their needs and address their challenges.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm happy to have you here. You're a kind of inside witness, seeing all these changes from inside the factories and in the plants. And so, of course, we should now discuss about these challenges which are around for the industry. When you are in these discussions with the industry in the US, first of all, I have to ask this. You have a new president. There is a certain industrial policy of maybe attracting international manufacturers to the US. I would like to ask about the situation of the US brands. Will the president be able to make American US car makers great again? What is your expectation? How's the mood in the industry, in the discussions you have?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and it's one that is evolving as we kind of go day by day. I think our president here. A lot of changes in a relatively short period of time, but I would say the focus is on revitalizing the U.S. manufacturing landscape, not just automotive, but automotive is squarely in his sights, and bringing U.S. manufacturers back up to where they have traditionally been. That being said, U.S. automotive manufacturing, and Denise said it earlier. I mean, you know, investments are not just with the big three in the U.S. They're with Honda, Toyota, Mazda, Hyundai, Kia, BMW, Volvo, Mercedes. So it's really when you talk about U.S. automotive manufacturing, it's not just the big three anymore. It's quite a number of brands. Um, but I will say, the focus is kind of on bringing the automotive industry back up to where we've seen it in the past. I mean, you know, there's challenges with some of the brands like Stellantis, you know, globally, but focusing on new technology, there's going to be labor challenges that come up. Obviously, that dirty word you mentioned earlier, tariffs, that we don't like to talk about. We don't know how that's going to come into play. But I think one of the focuses when you look at the U.S. automotive industry, it's about bringing supply chain back up and back into the U.S. as much as possible. President Trump has mentioned that several times. You can't manufacture automobiles without a robust supply chain, probably the most robust supply chain in any manufacturing environment globally. And we're still going to be reliant on global supply chains no matter what happens. I mean, you know, we don't have every resource imaginable in the U.S. to make those components to go into a car. If you look also, this is kind of long-winded answer, I know, but if you also look at the tariffs just recently announced on steel and aluminum, the steel industry in the U.S. has ground to a halt in many areas and many industries. And when you think about U.S. manufacturing, steel industry has been key to that up until the 80s, the 1980s. So, you know, there's the U.S. Steel Nippon merger that's taking place that was put on hold by the previous administration. Trump originally supported the hold. Now he's kind of loosened up on that, I think, after realizing that that's a way to bring steel manufacturing back in the U.S. So it's not just automotive manufacturing, it's the entire ecosystem of manufacturing.
The value chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let's discuss or also speak about another question. That's the regulation in industrial policy. Also, Mr. Logan will talk about this very intensively later. When we started our discussion, should we have a meeting with the industry here? We had this dual track idea. It was not quite clear. Will we go to EVs? Will we remain to combustion engines? And you told me about that there is not a very clear course on the regulators in the US. Maybe you can give a short overview what is discussed. We have California with this very strong environmental regulation. We know about that here in Europe, but how is it? How is the situation in the US in the moment?
Uncertain. So, but I think the certainty is around change with regards to the regulatory environment as it relates to electric vehicles specifically. I think the EV market in the U.S. and again, my opinion, but based on data, is that it's plateaued. You know, there's not a lot of new opportunities. There's a lot of bloated inventory for electric vehicles. The new administration is obviously making changes. They have a different view on climate change than our previous administration did. So some of the regulatory requirements are being rolled back or clawed back, as we say. There's still some court challenges to what's happening in California as far as what the EPA here can do, the Environmental Protection Agency can do to mandate change in California. California probably has the most aggressive, probably along with New York and some of the other states on the East Coast, related to climate change and as it specifically affects automobiles and any internal combustible engine. So thinking about all of that, it is a time of uncertainty, but the EV market, you're seeing kind of changes and challenges with regulations changing. For instance, the incentives related to EV purchases and the tax incentives, those are going to be rolled back. That's a definite. So there's not as much incentive financially for a consumer to buy an electric vehicle. You're seeing municipalities invest more into EVs with trash service, commuter services such as buses and public transportation. So some of that's still going forward, and it's just a mixed bag really in the U.S. It's just a sea change, if you will, from the previous administration's thought to the current administration's thought.
Now coming back to inside the factories, how do the manufacturers handle this uncertainty, this unclear? We said they should go a dual or maybe also a trial track to have all products available, but automotive production is not that kind that you can change it every few months. So it's a long-term investment done by OEMs. And what is the course you witness in the decisions, in the investments, in the long-term decisions of all these OEM investors you mentioned as your partners or customers?
Yeah, so again, we work with the tier one suppliers and logistics organizations, but I think what we're seeing, or what and talking to some of our customers and others, again, there's a sea change happening. If you look at the collective investments of the manufacturers in the U.S. to EV plants and EV technology, it's in the tens of billions of dollars. It's not a small investment that a lot of these car manufacturers made in the early 2020s when EVs were really, the focus. And, you fast forward to last year, late 2023, and the automotive industry started seeing slowdown of purchases of electric vehicles. So what's that mean, especially now, again, not to be political, but bringing in the current administration and the change there, is I think you're seeing more investment back into ICE technology and ICE platforms in the U.S. Again, EV sales have somewhat plateaued. There's a lot of bloated inventory. A lot of car manufacturers have more EVs than they can sell. But I think one thing you're seeing that's interesting is probably more focus on hybrids. Hybrids are much more familiar to consumers as far as, you still put a tank of gas in. You don't have the range anxiety, but you do get extended range, better fuel efficiency. So I think that's the stopgap approach to full electrification is kind of, reinvestment down to full ICE until the consumer says, hey, I want really, more consumers say, hey, I really want to invest in TVs. But to those consumers looking for better efficiency that have range anxiety, there's more hybrid investment, and there's more options for hybrids than there was, previously in the last few years. So that's been a change that I've seen that's been notable. For instance, if you're driving 300 miles, 400 miles to a beach trip or to a business meeting, you don't want to fly and you want to drive, you worry about an EV, how far it can get you without having to stop and recharge. Even though there's all kinds of education out there, the automotive manufacturers say, hey, we've got range, options to handle all these. Hybrids are kind of, again, that stopgap. And over here in the U.S., we love our big trucks and our big SUVs and our big vehicles. So there's a lot of investment back into those more profitable model lines around just, again, pure ICE because they're heavier, they're bigger, they're harder to manage as far as range goes. So anyway, I think the automotive manufacturers have realized they sunk a lot of investment into EV plants, battery plants. Some of these battery plants are as large as some of the manufacturing plants if you look at them. And they're wondering how and when their ROI is going to occur. So, you know, the investment's already made, the cash is already spent or underway, but it's when the ROI is going to happen. And that's the big question for automotive manufacturers. So in the meantime, they're focusing back on more profitable ICE platforms.
Okay, so one more question to this topic. So the OEMs and the first tiers, they are forced to run this dual track. Is it possible in these days when there is a huge global competition, there is a cost pressure to maintain, let's say, the inventory or the infrastructure you need for a certain kind of either EV or combustion engines? How do they handle this practically? This is a challenge to the supply chains, to the whole value chains.
Absolutely, and it trickles down to obviously suppliers. You know that I think one of the biggest impact is to suppliers and profitability and cost pressures on the supplier base. That impacts the overall supply chain. Automotive manufacturers, they look at what's profitable versus and what's selling, and then they have to kind of figure out, okay, EVs are on the rise now. They've like I said, plateaued. Sales have slowed dramatically. So investing more back into IC platforms, and the cost pressure, and how do they do that is they keep finding ways to increase efficiency and automation to reduce cost, push, and as much as we don't like to talk about it, push that cost pressure back down on the supplier base. Say, hey, what can you do to help us reduce cost? What's the best way to do that? I want you to help me realize those cost savings that you realize that you're going to need in order to stay in business and stay profitable. From an engineering standpoint, I mean, it's a matter of, there's been greenfield investments and new plants for EVs, so you have that occurring. There's been some transition of previous IC plants into EVs, but there's a lot of other plants that never quit making ICs. The volumes just slowed down, so they can maximize it. Yeah, I'm sorry, let's go ahead.
Was a question in between. Do they reduce the size of the plants? Is there any reduction in planning the volumes? I mean, that means also the whole infrastructure of manufacturing. Is there are there any breaks to see in recent weeks and months?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing, and I read about it constantly, is reduction of shifts. So instead of working 3 shifts, they might cut down to 2 shifts. So the plants, are again, all the robotics, everything that's in a plant to run it. You're not really going to reduce the amount of equipment needed to manufacture a car. You're going to reduce the amount of time needed and flex on your shifts. So instead of having 3 shifts, you might, for a platform, you might go down to 2 shifts. And then you might flex a little bit more and say, hey, we're going to make, various cars on one line with 2 different shifts. So there's all kinds of ways to do it, but they're not really reducing the size of the plants to handle volume. They're flexing the labor.
Okay, before we go to the next topic of the value chain, I have a question of Rachel from the chat. She asks, would you say the limited EV infrastructure in the US has played a role in slower consumer adoption?
Oh, absolutely. Again, that plays into the range anxiety. We just don't have the infrastructures to support, and it's just the charging infrastructure to support widespread EV adoption. We still have gas stations or petrol stations everywhere that don't have EV charging stations, and how, in the EV charging infrastructure, I know it's been talked about endlessly, but what do you do in density housing areas like with apartments? How do you put chargers in there? It's costly to put a charger in. I think under the previous administration, they spent, allocated in about $8 billion to invest in charging infrastructure, and only a limited number of chargers have been implemented across the U.S. You're seeing places like hotels and others invest in chargers, and very large, very large gas stations, convenience stores will put a few charging stations in, but it's just not enough to handle the widespread adoption. There's also how does, there's also the question of how does our electric grid handle the capacity for more EVs? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a larger consumer play than it is a manufacturing play around the EV. Again, in the U.S., we love our big vehicles. And that plays a big piece into it, and some of the automakers here who make big pickup trucks and SUVs that were going to fully electrify those have delayed those plans because they're just not selling, and they'd rather invest back into expanding the ICE platforms that they been so successful with so many years, especially notable brands like Ford F-150 pickup trucks, Rams, GMs, GMCs, that again, I don't know why, but we love our big vehicles here. And I think that's been a play into it. So.
Okay, I hope this answered the question of Rachel. I would like now to come to a claim that you had in one of your blogs. You're writing a blog on the Insequence.com website, and one of your few points had the claim or the headline, "Forget the supply chain, create a value chain." That caused some questions. What do you mean with that change in the perspective of OEMs and suppliers? And are they able to follow this concept in these times of change and pressures, or do they need to follow this concept?
Yeah, that's really a really good question. So this thought hit me. I was attending a conference last year in Bonn, and a lot of OEMs were presenting, suppliers, and this idea of value chain kept coming up. So I really thought about that and started thinking about what that meant over the last 4 years. Through COVID, we've seen supply chain reach levels of vulnerability that we never expected. There's single points of failure now in the supply chain that can impact everybody, multiple points of failure. Geopolitical instability that, like in Ukraine, where a lot of wire manufacturers were located, what happens when supply chain is abruptly impacted. So value chain approach to me really recognizes the interdependence, but also interconnectivity of all the players in the supply chain, and improving and enhancing collaboration, communication, visibility into the supply chain. Earlier we heard Industry 4.0. I think that's a big component into this idea of the value chain, but it's really about taking and strengthening the supplier relationships with OEMs and all points in between. So logistics organizations, better long-term planning with greater visibility. But again, it's really about, previously, before COVID, we took supply chain, I think, for granted in many ways. It was always stable, reliable. There weren't a lot of challenges around it that we didn't see, but COVID certainly stressed that. You went from labor challenges during COVID to chip shortage, and all of a sudden you couldn't get enough chips to make a car. Well, what's the long-term plan to mitigate that risk? Now, a lot of people are looking back and figuring that out, but what what else besides chips can impact the supply chain? So long-term planning is a bigger component of that. And the long-term planning doesn't mean an OEM sitting here saying, "Hey, I'm going to strategically come up with a plan and push that down." It's, hey, the OEMs, which is the way it was a lot of times in the past. But OEM now is saying, "Hey, let's bring everybody to the table. Let's bring the tier one, tier two, tier three. Let's talk about logistics. What technologies out there to help us better interconnect our supply chain and give us more visibility into where, a multiple point of, where the multiple point of failures could be, or is it a single point of failure?" So it's really about kind of streamlining the complexity. Some of it's nearshoring, where you can identify and you might be receiving parts from another geography. You might need to bring that closer to mitigate a certain risk. And then you focus on new trains of thought, like, finding sustainability models. What's happening, with the eco-friendly kind of approach to manufacturing that we all have to embrace nowadays. Green manufacturing. When you talk about smart factories, well, a lot of that is, better environmental protections. So you have all these kind of underlying currents impacting the supply chain, and then you bring that back up, and again, the value chain, the value of that is, let's bring everybody together. Let's figure out where technology can make a bigger play. Let's figure out how to work better together. Let's plan better and look at the overall, risk factors and mitigate those risks as much as possible. That's really what I mean by the value chain. There's a lot of components to it, but I believe it's critical. Um, and the number one key to me is better communication, greater collaboration.